Ooh, landlords have been sucked in. How do you get rid of your tenant with new legislation and changes? A lot harder than you think. Stay tuned.
I'm the ringleader, so listen up.
Cleo, expert property manager. Tenants want to get rid of their landlords, and landlords want to get rid of their tenants these days, but the laws have changed a lot. Please explain.
Well, it's not a new topic, but we have covered a little bit about the legislative terms with no grounds notices being abolished. So in the past, you could end a fixed term agreement, as in you signed up your tenant for a 12-month lease. At the end of the contract, you just want to end it for whatever reason. It was an end of fixed term. So you could cancel the end of the fixed term with a 30-day notice from the owner. And there was no questions. It was just the contract not being renewed. You can't do that now. Also, when a tenant then went on to periodic, they weren't on fixed term. The 90-day no grounds notice meant there was no reason, you just got a 90-day termination notice. Now, the new legislation, you still give 90 days, but you have to have a valid reason to want the tenant to vacate your property. And the reasons have been set by the legislation, such as major renovations where the habitation of the property, is not fit for the tenant whilst renos are happening, a family member moving in or yourself moving in, two of the big ones. You have to have evidence that this is the case, and you have to supply this evidence when sending the termination notice. And you also have to provide the tenant with the termination information statement. And that if that's not attached, which I found out at NCAT, we knew this, but it can get thrown out immediately. If the tenant doesn't receive that statement, the notice is invalid. Off you go, property manager, and then the 90 days has to start all over again. It's a piece of paper that just says you acknowledge that these are the reasons and da-da-da-da-da, which most tenants know anyway now. So it's just very difficult for our landlords right now.
I'll give you an example. I had a landlord on the phone last week and they're like, yep, I manage a property myself and I've asked the tenant to leave and they've said no. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, you've got to do
Why
this.
not?
And he's like, what do you mean I've got to do that? He said, what about if I do this? I'm like, can't get him to move out. He goes, what about if I do that? And I'm like, can't get him to move out. He goes, and what about if I say that there's more than one living in the property? I said, can't get him to move out. And he must have tried like a dozen things, old tricks. And I was like, can't get it done. And he goes, well, I said, I, t- I said, it's two types of problems. There's my problem and there's other people's problem. I said, this is an other person's problem. I said to him, he goes, what do you mean? I said, this is yours. I said, if you want us to manage the asset, we'll manage the exit of the tenant in a legal and a legal manner. But I said, otherwise, we're not here to go through every scenario and step you through every conversation and email you have with the owner. But my point is, it's difficult and it's a very complicated landscape these days managing a property, and particularly when it comes to exiting of the tenants. If you don't do it correctly and you're relying on that exit, and you get to the end of the 90 days, and the tenant goes,
No, I'm not moving. Yeah.
and they know there's legislation better than you, or they know ChatGPT better than you, you're in trouble.
Yeah, it is difficult for private landlords more so than ever. And having an agent protect you and your asset during a time where you do want possession back of your property is paramount. You can make so many errors that will then put you back further and it could cost you money in excess of $10,000 if you make the wrong, you send the wrong notice, or you don't send the right documentation. We did have that client, he had to have his property vacant for 3 months, his primary source of income, and he wasn't able to rent it out, like his own asset. He wasn't able to rent it out. Like, it's
Yeah, the
very
rent's not coming
frustrating.
in, but the mortgage is continuing.
Look, rents are going, they say it on the news every day, short-term pain, long-term gain. The rents are, will go up. Rents are going up, but tenants are also very complacent with this process, not because they don't expect it and it's not televised, but their cost of living is hard as well. So it's a two-way pull there. But if the owner is not going to be able to claim everything on the property, council water strata repairs, like, it just makes sense the rent's going to go up. But anyway, that's not our topic. Our topic is getting your tenants to move along amicably. Rent arrears, still, you can get tenants out if they don't pay rent on time. But
Yep.
even so, in this climate, a simple 14-day notice might not cut it. You have to show that there's a history of arrears. You have to have offered an SPO. For those that don't know, that's a specific performance order, where you go to NCAT and they put through a timeline of payment or repayment plan options. And then if the tenant defaults on that order, they also tie in a return date to NCAT. So that's locked in. So then you can go then back by that date without any hassles and say, look, the tenant hasn't complied with this order. Now, can we please terminate? So the guy that was in the NCAT yesterday, he did an SPO for $50 a week for the tenant to catch up on their rent arrears, and that was for every fortnight until the debt was paid down. And the member said, you applied for this on the 1st of April. Wow, that's a long time, and you only got a hearing date today. He's like, I know. So, you can expect up to 2 to 3 months for some of these hearing dates at NCAT, which is wild. So that's another
Wow.
little nugget we heard of yesterday. So if you are planning on taking your property back, you need to have the reasons set with your PM, and you need to give them a stat deck. You need to, give them the valid reason. We'll guide you through what's valid and what's not. And then hopefully the tenant is happy to go.
And I think on the flip side, everyone's probably scratching their head saying, I had no idea. Like a tenant didn't have idea how hard that was for a landlord. Landlords like, what? And anyone that knows landlords like, oh my God, this is incredible. But I think where the intentions came from is there was some retaliatory with rental increases and stuff like that. There was some retaliatory actions by landlords where the landlord was like, hey, if it ain't going to work, just get rid of him. And that the whole purpose of this is to get rid of the retaliatory actions of landlords. But each time you bring in a law like this, it actually restricts people's rights as a whole. And I think that, there are the people that they get the people that they wanted to get that were acting retaliatory, but a lot of other people get caught up in the mess and the legislation and then get restricted from, if they've got good intentions, what they want to do. What I do have to say is that I was with a friend last night who was very happy about the budget, talking about pushing landlords into new properties. And I was like, dude, do you know that there's not many new landlords out there? And he's like, what? I said, there's not many new landlords that enter the market these days because it sucks to be a landlord. It really sucks. And he said, what do you mean? I said, a landlord's being told that they can't put up their rent on their property in some way or fashion. He goes, what do you mean? I said, they can do it once a year. Like, how can you buy and own a property for 30 years or 1 year or whatever you own it for, and then be told how you can put up or increase your rent? Like, what the hell? And he's like, he goes, really? And then I went through the layers of stuff that's happened over 20 years for a landlord where they've been body slammed with legislation. And he's like, and I said, they don't want to be landlords anymore. They just move to another asset class. And this is another one.
Yeah, it's like, do you remember that game you used to play with when you were kids, the slap game, when you had put your hands there and then it's like slap. It's like, you want to be a landlord?
And we're going to give you
the
half.
new law.
We're, and it's going to go, and you've got rent coming in? Yes, 0.5% more interest for you. Stop.
Yeah.
And it's like, and, you know, like there's just so much, it's so much stuff over 20 years. And I'm like, why would you want to be a landlord? It's incredible. But look, the benefit of this, and I've been saying this to our client base, of we manage the most amount of properties in all the beaches, 2,000 properties. We've been saying to our landlords, guys, this is a great time for you. You've kept your negative gearing, and I personally think there's a lot less landlords entering the market. So the landlords that are in the market are going to have a hero of a time. I think it's going to be a record high time for rental increases as a result of our budget. Which ain't good for tenants, which I think it was a bad budget for tenants. And I actually think it was a good budget for landlords as a whole, and a good budget for developers as a whole. But coming into the market as a landlord, yeah, it's harder.
And look, we are going to go through it step by step as all these reforms, take place. And I'm sure we'll see how the market, corrects again, and we'll, just go through it with our clients. We're there to support both the tenants and the landlords always. And, we're constantly learning as we go along as well. So yeah, it'll be interesting. This time will be interesting for sure. That's a wrap. See ya.
Stop. Have a good day. Thank you so much for informing us on that. Guys,
Thanks.
if you ever need expert property management advice, this lady is here for you. Call Cleo anytime or ask anytime, and have a great day.
See you guys. Bye.
Love you. See ya. Bye.